Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland from the right.
And I'm Dallas Jones from the left.
This week on Red, White, and Blue, first of all, we're in new digs. Congratulations.
Hey, I feel fancy.
And we are honored to have Ambassador Edward Djerejian as our first guest in the new set. Welcome, Ambassador.
Privileged to be with both of you.
Yeah, and of course you have a resume we could spend the whole show talking about, but shorthand, key advisor to Secretary Baker, former ambassador to Israel and Syria, and it seems like forever the head of the Baker Institute at Rice University, and considered one of the preeminent experts on foreign policy in the country. So welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Now, you know, we switched the shows up to bring you forward because of world events, and we're gonna be doing that more and more often in terms of reacting quickly to what's going on in the world. So obviously over the last week and a half, we've had unbelievable things going on in the Middle East, in Iran and Iraq, with the United States, in Iran, the confrontation, the taking out of who I call the head terrorist for the regime in Iran. Others may call him other things. Where are we at as we stand here today in terms of what happened over the last week and a half?
Well, I think over the last week and a half in the Middle East, the region came close to outright warfare. I think we could take it back to the cruise missile strike in the Saudi Abqaiq oil facilities. The tension mounted. There was a lot of speculation that there'd be war between Iran and the neighboring states, or between the United States and Iran. But I think what all the parties, including the United States, demonstrated is that they all went close to the brink. They looked down the abyss. They didn't like what they saw, because they realized that if we went to war, the consequences would be so destabilizing for the region as a whole, and also for U.S. relations in the region and with our other partners and allies in the world. So that's the first thing, is that the neighborhood became extremely dangerous, but then the parties realized that it was too dangerous, and they were doing it. Then we have the Soleimani assassination, and it was an assassination, of the head of the Iranian IRGC, which then opened up a new chapter in the turmoil in the Middle East. And the big question was, what would the Iranian reaction be? And we saw what the reaction was. It was a very deliberate, targeted objective of an Iraqi base where there are U.S. military personnel, but there's every reason to believe from the information we've been told that there was some sort of warning given beforehand that something was going to happen there. Because I think the Iranians realized that one of the red lines that President Trump has put down is that he will not tolerate Americans being targeted per se. And if you go back to the Abqaiq, the Saudi Arabia Aramco thing, he made a statement that to me didn't get a lot of notice, but one of his first reactions was, well, what are you going to do, Mr. President? And he said, well, you know, the United States wasn't attacked, Saudi Arabia was attacked. So what we're seeing is that the parties have come very close to confrontation and military hostilities, but now the parties have withdrawn, and I'm talking about all the parties. There's dialogues going on now between Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates and Iran, Qatar and Iran, Turkey and Iran, the European Union, Macron and Iran, and even I would not be surprised if there are channels between the United States and Iran. In fact, I know the Swiss represent us in Tehran, the Swiss embassy, and the head of the office there, the liaison office for the United States, has been given messages to convey to the Iranians. So here we are in this new situation.
Tehran has pledged that as a result of what has happened recently, that it will continue to, it will not slow down its pursuit of nuclear weapons. That this was a wrinkle in the Iran nuclear deal, which we have already withdrawn from, so no skin off our backs. But, you know, what this has done is I think to your point, a lot of these countries are having conversations with Iran, and it has made some of them say, hey, look, you know, if you accelerate your nuclear weapon program, then, you know, that means that we are going to insist on these ongoing sanctions that will hurt your economy. My question to you is, are we indeed less safe, which it's been shown recently through poll that Americans do feel less safe as a result of what has happened in Iran and frankly what can only be attributed to the actions of this president and this administration, Gary. Are we less safe?
2 points. One, I think we're less safe because these tensions in the region that we've just noted, and there are others, can lead to miscalculation on the part of the parties. And I think we can all be surprised by something that happens. It may not be directed at the top of any country or party, but bad things can happen that can bring the parties back to confrontation. So I think we're less safe because of the risk of miscalculation in the region, because it's become so unstable. The other part is, you mentioned the Iranian, the nuclear deal, the so-called JCPOA. I think we're less safe because I thought that that agreement, with all its faults, it gave us a larger time frame in which Iran was not able to enrich uranium, increase its construction of centrifuges, et cetera, and under strict IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, inspections, spot inspections, unannounced. To me, that was imperfect, but better than what we had, which was only a 1-year timeline where Iran could go nuclear. Now, with the agreement, we had a 10, 15-year timeline, which is being criticized because it's a timeline, what happens after it, and that can be expanded. The point you made, Dal, is that the Europeans have stepped in. The United States, as you said, has withdrawn. But the Europeans very much want this agreement to continue and to be enhanced and improved. So Germany, the French, the UK have been very active in the last few days, and they put forward a proposal to refer this to the United Nations to see what can be done to prevent Iran from increasing its uranium enrichment, its centrifuges, and to say if you continue this way, there may be sanctions that will be imposed under the UNSC, additional sanctions. But they don't want to destroy the JCPOA, they want to preserve it. So this is a very interesting moment. We're going to see where this leads.
Do you think that President Trump has made clear to the Iranians, so there is no miscalculations, what his red lines are? I mean, in reality, real red lines, as opposed to President Obama, who I believe spoke ahead of himself in Syria and put down markers that he never intended to keep and then got caught when things went south and ended up looking bad. Do you think we've got some clarity here?
Well, I think any American president should be very cautious about putting down red lines. And if he or she puts down a red line, they've got to be able to and totally prepared to follow up on a red line, whatever action is threatened. I think what Trump has done is that he has made the issue of deterrence more clear, that if Americans are targeted, then he will act. And that has had, with the Soleimani affair, I think that has had an impact. But the question is, the Trump administration is imposing these all-out sanctions, maximum pressure on Iran. But for what end? Does the administration want Iran to come to the table of negotiations? If that's the case, I see some hope. But if it's only maximum pressure for something like regime change that John Bolton wanted, the former national security advisor, I think that's wrong-headed. Trump himself has said we're not for regime change. That's another thing he said. It didn't get a lot of attention, but he said that. So my point is that there's the title of my book when I did my autobiography is Danger and Opportunity. Oh. We're in a dangerous situation in the Middle East, but there's also an opportunity to really get engaged in structural negotiations with the Iranians, but bringing together our European and Arab partners in the region. This is very important, and also getting Israel on board.
I would say that from the left. I feel like I'm in a car and the driver has no idea where we're going, and it is a great opportunity to take our eyes off of impeachment and other things happening in this country. Hey, Gary, it is what it is, right?
Impeachment will be over in a week and
Well,
a half.
I hear, because people can't get a fair trial. But nevertheless, we won't go there, not this show.
Not this show.
Nevertheless, we're hearing that Soleimani was this great threat and that they were planning to attack us, and there was evidence of these attacks on Americans, and yet the administration has not been able to provide evidence to Congress that this was indeed the case. There are a tremendous amount of mixed messages out there. How do we as the public decipher between what we're seeing and what we're hearing, the dangers and the opportunities of what's currently happening?
Well, I think the American public is rightfully confused by the speculation. Was there an imminent threat against so-called 4 embassies? That was one report. Was there an imminent threat against American targets, or was this part of a longer-term program that Soleimani was orchestrating to target Americans, installations, organizations, or individuals? You've seen the television interviews of U.S. congressmen and senators, and you get a very confused room. So I think the American public has not been well served. The American public has a right to know what the threat was that incurred this lethal action against Soleimani. So no one is regretting his demise on the U.S. side, Democrats and Republicans. That's not the point. But what led the administration to actually pull the trigger? And I think that is a question that remains, and eventually that'll come out. But when you have the Secretary of Defense saying, I had no information on the targeting of embassies, and the President saying something else, that's not good coordinated policy.
It's kind of hard to tell where the truth starts and where the truth ends. I have no idea. And the media, I mean, my reaction to a lot of the criticism of Trump is it doesn't matter what Trump does. If you're anti-Trump, if you're a never-Trumper, it doesn't matter what he does, you don't like it, really. He could cure cancer tomorrow, and I believe there are critics of Trump who would criticize him for destroying the medical profession that deals with cancer, because this whole infrastructure would be gone. So I think in many ways he's treated unfairly. But on the other hand, there needs to be a little more clarity in policy. And I think part of it is his leadership style, and that he makes decisions and doesn't necessarily talk to everybody. And they kind of have to watch his tweets to get the response. That all being said, I believe the vast majority of the American people believe taking this guy out was important because it reestablished American deterrence, which was gone after knocking down our $100 million drone and blowing up the Saudi oil factories, etc. There was no deterrence. Remember, there were people in Bolton and others were saying, well, we need to react to this. There was no reaction because obviously President Trump's red line is American lives. That's it. You take out American lives, you've got a problem. And I don't think that the embassy situation in Iraq is fully appreciated by the American people either. This embassy is humongous. It's our biggest embassy in the world. There's like 17,000 people that work there. So when they attacked the embassy, which was orchestrated by Soleimani, I actually thought what was coming was a takeover of the embassy too, like they did before, which would be hugely humiliating to Trump. And if he let him get away with it like Carter did, that would be the end and demise of his presidency.
Gary, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in here.
Go ahead.
Listen, I hear what you're saying, but you made this statement, the majority of American people, feel like this guy should have been taken out. First of all, the majority of American people don't know who this guy is, right? And certainly, you talk about the president and his valuing American lives and that being the stopping point. But what people are realizing is that they're watching their loved ones get on planes and those that have put forth their lives to serve their country, that they're wondering and living in fear of whether or not they're going to be deployed again for another war predicated on a cause, frankly, brought forth by a Republican administration. Where we went into Iraq being told that there were weapons of mass destruction that never manifested itself, and now we're being told that there were these threats that may or may not have been there. That's American lives. That's American lives, and we don't know what the counter from Iran is going to be. So I disagree with you saying that the majority of the public feels like this was necessary, because I know, put it like this, the majority of the people that I know, right, don't think that this was necessary, not at the time. And frankly, you know, we're at a place where Iran is preparing to bring a case against the United States and the president in the World Court.
Well,
right?
we're not a member of the World Court, so we don't really care. And I will tell you that what is going on there, Iran is a problem for U.S. interests. The question is, that you suggest that
I didn't say that wasn't the case.
Trump is interested in going to war with Iran. He's not, but he is interested in reestablishing deterrence, which he did. So we saw and we've seen that Iran, when they're confronted with force, backs down. They are not wanting to tangle with U.S. air power and U.S. weapon systems. They're not. They're not going to do it. Just like they've reacted, just by the way, just the way they've reacted to how Israel has taken out a lot of their weapon systems they're trying to bring forward to threaten Israel. They don't react in the way you'd think they would, because they don't want to tangle with Israel.
The foreign policy of this administration is a sham. It's clear from North Korea to Iran. However, we're not here to give our opinion. We're going to let the ambassador respond. But you bring up a question I did want to ask. What does this mean for Israel? How does Israel posture and respond to what has been a forever threat towards its sovereignty? What does it mean?
The Israeli position is intriguing. The Israelis have made very clear this is not our fight. They've said so publicly, from their military intelligence people to various officials, that we're going to take a quote-unquote backseat to this confrontation between the United States and Iran, because they're calculating their own national interests, and they have obviously the military wherewithal to respond to any threat that they perceive coming from Iran, be it from Hezbollah in Lebanon, be it from the Iranian presence in Syria, or be it from other avenues. So they are being, I think, very cautious, because they don't want, again, they don't want to see a devolution into war, because they don't think that Israel's national security interests would be promoted by that. So the Israelis have taken a backseat to all of this at this point, and they're leaving. I think they're calculating that what I mentioned before, this coming to the danger and coming to a confrontation, and then looking down at the abyss, and then the parties pulling back. They want to see where this comes out before they have to make any judgments. But let me say one thing about, you've both been debating Trump's foreign policy. And my own view of what American foreign policy should be in this administration, or be in any administration confronting this, is basically that, one, we should continue to prevent and avoid a regional war in the Middle East. I think there's more losers than any winners in that. That's number one, for all the reasons you both, from your both sides, right and left, have described. The second thing is that I think we need to bolster our counterterrorism capabilities, because that's where the threats are going to continue to come from. Counterterrorism, be it national, be it in the region, but our special forces, all the capabilities we have to counter the terrorist threat in all its manifestations. And third, we should be able to prepare for asymmetrical confrontation, because that's where the Iranians are very good at, asymmetric, using their proxies, be it in Lebanon, be it in Yemen, be it in Syria, be it wherever, to be prepared for asymmetrical challenges to our interests. And fourth and last, the opportunity. Seek avenues of dialogue that we can get into a U.S.-Iranian dialogue. Trump himself has said he would like to talk with the president of Iran. Well, if that's true, find a way to get there, and without illusions, because right now the prospects for any real dialogue that comes to, any positive end is pretty slim. But if you open the doors for dialogue, so I think that should be our policy. It's a four-pronged policy.
I was going to ask you about what we've seen on television over the last couple of weeks in Iran. So after Soleimani's death, there was a big turnout of people that were supportive of him and mourners. Some people said they were coerced or they're part of the whole team, but they still showed up. So that was a big crowd. And then we discovered that Iran was lying about shooting down the Ukrainian airplane using one of their missiles. They tried to blame Trump for that, because they try to blame Trump for everything. But regardless, the people then come out of the streets in Iran and are protesting against being lied to by their government. So what does that tell us internally? What's going on in Iran? I mean, our goal may not be regime change, but there sounds like there's a lot of people in Iran that would like to see regime change. Right.
You're pointing to something that's really very important that we're witnessing in the Middle East. When Soleimani was assassinated, the Iranian people came together because they felt that their national identity was being attacked from a foreign power. And so you saw the forces of Persian nationalism come together in the streets. Now remember, a week before that, there were major demonstrations and protests in Iran against the regime's policies, economic, social, corruption.
It shot a lot of people.
Right. And so that was a threat to the stability of the Iranian regime. When the Ukrainian airliner was shot down, it demonstrated the ineptitude of the regime again and brought the protesters back into the streets. So in a period of one short week, it's like nothing had happened and the protesters are back because those are the fundamental gripes that the Iranian people have against their regime. Look at Iraq. The demonstrations in Iraq are incredibly important, as are the demonstrations in Lebanon, because why? They're multi-confessional. In Iraq, you have Shia and Sunni. There are two schools of Muslim thought coming together, Kurds coming together and demonstrating against the corruption of the regime, the fallen economy, the dysfunction of the society. Those demonstrations are now occurring again in Iraq. In Lebanon, from North Lebanon to South Lebanon, you have Sunnis, Muslims, Christians, Druze coming together and saying, we got to get rid of this system, not the government. And they're saying the same thing in Iraq. We have to get rid of the system. This is very significant. Now, these are popular protests. There's no one individual leader or organization, but what you have is the resurgence of Lebanese nationalism, Iraqi nationalism, and Iranian nationalism. If our policymakers in Washington are smart, we should be not only observing this, but seeing how we can promote our interests by supporting in an intelligent way. Because if we're too upfront about it, it'll have a counter effect. It'll be interference. But this is something that we should be supporting, is the demands of the people in Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran for social justice. And so this is another opportunity for creative American diplomacy, and I find an opportunity there.
That's actually very exciting. I mean, those people do want to be
absolutely
liberated and be able to live, have nice lives, good jobs, futures for their family, which right now is kind of doubtful in a lot of those places.
Exactly.
Real quick. So, two very quick questions because we're running out of time here. First, do you see all of this having any effect on what is the big talk of the year, which is our domestic elections here in the U.S.? Secondly, what does this all mean for our viewers?
Well, what this means is that the United States cannot isolate itself from what's happening out there. You'll remember during the Syrian civil war, people sort of said, well, it's happening in Syria. But what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. No. The Syrian civil war brought thousands of people emigrating to Europe and the great fear of the other coming into our societies, and even Brexit. One of the reasons for Brexit is the turmoil in the Middle East. And you saw what other European countries have done is this return to nationalism and, putting up walls, against the other. So we should have even though we have this large ocean that separates us, the fact is that what happens there, and let's not forget 9/11, what happens there can visit us here.
Right.
And so we have to construct policies. My message is that the American people should be cognizant that the decisions that the people we've elected to represent us in Washington, decisions they make on U.S. Middle East policy affect their lives.
Well, Ambassador, sounds like he shouldn't be here. We need to get you on a plane to Washington.
Well, you're available, right, for consultation with
I think they need you. We need you.
with government officials.
Well, I've been there.
Been there, done that.
Been there and done that.
But you and your ilk are still called on for advice from
Yes.
leadership in the country.
Yes.
Secretary Baker is
Secretary Baker's
talks
consulted.
to
Yes,
Secretary
absolutely.
of State
Yep,
Pompeo.
absolutely. Every Secretary of State is consulted with him, and we have our ties into every administration. We've been involved in Democratic and Republican administrations, giving advice not only when called upon, but even when not called upon. You know, the Baker Institute, the policy recommendations we've made on domestic and foreign policy issues,
Well,
we activate.
And it's clear why. It's
Yes.
clear why.
Well,
You're always a great guest here on Red, White, and Blue.
Yeah, Ambassador Djerejian, always a pleasure. Thank you
It's
so much
great
for
being with you
taking
guys.
time out from
And
your
I
busy
enjoyed your
schedule.
debate.
It's a new year.
We will be back next week with actually next week it'll be the spring election preview that I
Looking
know
forward to
Dallas is
that.
looking forward to
We're
that.
looking
So am
forward
I,
to
and we hope you've enjoyed the new set. Our inaugural guest. We're really excited.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a fun spring.